Oh, okay.
Thank you,
So
Maya.
good morning.
Good morning. This is our 53rd, 54th consecutive
54.
episode.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Wow.
So once again, good morning to you and
Good
to
morning.
the people who are watching us on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and to the people who are listening to us on Clubhouse. This is our preliminary 5 minutes. Uh, yes. Well, we meant to have 10 minutes. Now we have 5 minutes preliminary time to make a short introduction to the Japanese politics one-on-one room with our special speaker, Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire, the consultancy agency in Tokyo. So, Timothy has over 40 years in Japan. He's well versed in Japanese politics, in public affairs, public policies, and today he is going to walk us through uh, the events and the developments in the Japanese politics during the past 1 week. Timothy, here we go.
Thank you very much, Maya. So last week we've met 54 times, 53 times consecutively every Sunday
Yeah.
at 8:30 on Clubhouse. This initiative linking in the people who are on LinkedIn, the LinkedIn audience, with Clubhouse started maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Thank you very much for that innovation. So we're going to give just a very brief outline of what we talked about last week, what we're going to talk about this week, and then pour it over to Clubhouse. I think we'll still be broadcasting on LinkedIn until the
Yes.
questions begin, and then we'll just go exclusively on to Clubhouse. So this this briefing will exist on LinkedIn for a couple of days until the news gets old, and then we'll meet again next Sunday.
Yes, indeed. Well,
Okay, so
so
let me just give a brief outline of what it was that we talked about last week, so that we can build on that this week. Last week, we started with, as always, talking about Mr. Kishida. He is our favorite thing to talk about when we talk about Japanese politics. Um, you will remember that his poll numbers are starting to shake a little bit, and that's because of the COVID response, and we have more news on that. But last week, the biggest news was Ukraine, because it was at a flashpoint, and President Joe Biden was talking about imminent incursions by the Russian army and the military there. A lot has happened over the last week. It looks like it's not going to happen, then it looks like it's going to happen. So we have a little bit of updates there, and how it impacts Japanese politics and Japanese geopolitics. As you might remember, we talked last week also about the secretaries of state having a kind of whirlwind tour throughout Asia. They met in Hawaii this time Saturday last week, but they were in Fiji, they were in Australia, trying to develop this cohesion that they need, not specifically, they're not exclusively with regard to the China encroachment on Taiwan, but kind of that is the underlying thing, but also about just what the core team is going to do with
mm,
regard to Ukraine and that sort of thing. We talked also about regional. What did we talk about? I've got my notes here. We talked about Okinawa. We talk about Okinawa pretty frequently on this channel because of the U.S. military presence there, and the controversy with the relocation of military forces, U.S. military forces, from Futenma to Hinoko, and the just the fight between the governor and the central government there. And then we talked about the LDP, what's going on within the LDP, the various factions there, and the identification of 5 former prime ministers for chastisement for kind of saying the wrong thing in international fora about the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. So they were chastised and going up for a censure within the Diet. So we'll have more to report on that. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about Mr. Kishida, about the economic security bill, which will be on the dock this week. It should be passed this week. A little bit more about Ukraine, what's going on with COVID, the booster shots, and the diminution of entry restrictions for foreigners, for students, for business travelers, what's going on in Korea, and we'll wrap it up there and take questions and answers, and also, entertain other issues that people have who are in the audience. Thank you very much, Maya.
Yes, thank you, Timothy. I'm still tackling the technical stuff, getting used to it. Well, that's great. Thank you. And I just noticed one thing. It's technical thing. So you sound through my icon and my microphone on Clubhouse at the moment. So we're going to do that today until we figure out how we can do it better next time. So, but yes, we can still, you are on Clubhouse as well, just not physically, only as an audio voice. So thank you very much. Great. Well, and it's 8:30, so we can start the briefing, right? And
Right.
yes, so this is going to be a little bit hard on you because you will be on screen up until you finish the briefing, which I appreciate very much, and thank you in advance for being there and for doing this. Yes, of course. But anyway, okay. So one thing, again, technical challenges, we have some, but once we finish the briefing, please log in to Clubhouse once again, or when you exit the studio, please check whether your Clubhouse is active on your iPhone. Okay? Thank you.
Okay.
So let's go. Here we go
Okay.
with today's briefing and the topics which you just listed.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya. So
Thank you.
we're just kind of working through this experiment of having LinkedIn and Clubhouse together. So audience, please forgive us for some of the snafus as we work through this. This is our second attempt. And today, as a new feature, we're going to include the briefing into LinkedIn as well. Last week, we just included the introduction, and then we cut it off at 8:30 and started our Clubhouse. So hopefully we can expand our audience, people who are interested in Japanese politics, who thirst for what's going on because there are so few avenues to actually figure it out, that you can get insight, you can get intel on what's going on in Japanese politics. If you like this sort of thing, continue to link in with us on Sunday mornings at 8:30 or a little bit earlier for LinkedIn viewers. And also link in with Maya, send a LinkedIn request to Maya or to myself so you get these automatic updates on when we're giving the briefing. So with that behind me, let's talk about our briefing. What's going on with Mr. Kishida, his administration, what's going on inside Japanese politics within the factions, what's the preparation for the upper house election, which will be in June or in July, and what's going on in the Diet right now. So Mr. Kishida, they do a poll every month to ask people what their impression is of what's going on with the Prime Minister, how he's doing, that sort of thing. Jiji Press just released their monthly results yesterday, and it looks like the Prime Minister is still kind of faltering down. It's a little bit tough for him. He's a new Prime Minister. The honeymoon is over. 100 days have passed. He's put his cabinet together, and thankfully there have not been too many scandals. Scandals, as you know, if you're watching Japanese politics, is a pretty dominant feature of understanding Japanese politics. Similarly, in South Korea, they're going through a presidential election, and scandal is just it's almost the central feature of politics in that country. Here in Japan, similarly, not to the degree, but it does play a role. So in understanding Japanese politics, one of the things you need to kind of follow, as I follow, is what's going on in the scandal rags, Bunshun, those kind of magazines that are critical of the government and who expose certain things that are going on in the background. It's a very effective policy tool. It is highly read and highly evaluated, although it is somewhat of a kind of a scandal magazine. It does dig up dirt, but it only does that because the Japanese press are not that aggressive. They are not that inquisitive. They're not really pulling apart policy initiatives and reporting on what's going on behind the scenes. And that's because, for a lot of different reasons, the Kisha Club being one of them, but also this desire to control everything that is within controllable ability of the Japanese government, the central government, the prime minister's office, to be able to manage what's going on and what the storyline is. So there's a lot of things going on there. But with the prime minister, the reason given for his numbers falling, he fell in the last survey. He fell about 4 points. He was still at 51% approval rating, and the negative ratings were in the 30s. So it wasn't too terribly bad. This time he's fallen 4 more points, so it's kind of in the 49% approval rating, and that is anchored on his performance with COVID specifically. It's not so much on his geopolitics or his management of the internal policies or his pronouncements about the economic security. It is mostly, although those do come into play, it is mostly about COVID. So you might recall that the booster shots received a lot of fanfare in the supplemental budget. They received a huge portion of money there, also infrastructure for hospitals on dealing with COVID, on dealing with the new strategy of eliminating COVID 100%, which is the China policy, but to live with COVID, to have the hospitals and the services and the various devices that deal with people who have COVID to shift to there, to accept that you're going to have COVID anyway. So that the strategy changed there, but the booster shots, even though they were ordered, haven't come in. And so he's received a lot of criticism for that. And you'll also know that over the last 2 months, internationally, there was this push for inoculating children. There was a lot of controversy about that it was unnecessary, that children were suffering as a result of that it was a little bit too aggressive. But the Japanese Ministry of Health has agreed to that policy. And for children between the ages of 6 and 11, they have authorized child booster shots and inoculations. So that has also stumbled. It hasn't come out as smoothly, but those will be available in March. At the same time, though, the prime minister has promised, I'm going to hit 1 million inoculations per day as we go forward. So he's pushing that, and you'll have noticed. I mean, everybody has. If you're living in Japan, you have friends who have received their third shot, their booster shot, and that's because not only the self-defense forces are ramping up on that, as they did with the first inoculation and the second, but also the government is encouraging companies to also handle that. So Japan Airlines, ANA, Rakuten, these large companies are inoculating their staff. They're taking the shots, the boosters, and they're giving them to their employees. They're giving them time off to get those. They're hiring the doctors and that sort of thing. And also they're extending it to their immediate family. So that's really pushing this forward. It is helping, reduce the number and to kind of calm the fears. But it is something of a worry for the prime minister, since he's being really evaluated harshly along those lines. So you're going to see a little bit more news on that, a little bit more energy on that. The Diet is still in session, so every day the prime minister is in the hot seat. It's televised, so you can watch what's going on, and it's generally reported pretty widely in the Japanese press, not so much in the English language press, on the controversies and the questions and who's coming up and that sort of thing. The economic security bill, so the Diet is in session. The economic security bill will be pushed for a vote. It'll go to the lower house on Monday, and then it'll go to the upper house on Tuesday, assuming it passes through there. And it is expected to become law pretty shortly. This is the kind of hallmark that the prime minister has hung his hat. If you remember with Mr. Suga, he established the digital agency in record time. And that was kind of the hallmark of his administration. With Mr. Kishida, he wants economic security to be the hallmark. And it's passed very fast, and assuming that does pass, it looks like it will pass with the numbers that the LDP welds in both houses. It looks like it will be become law. It's suffered a little bit because of a scandal you might have heard of. We talked about it last week, where the individual, the bureaucrat within the Prime Minister's office, who is in charge of the legislative area of the economic security bill, was chased down by some reporters from Bunshun, interestingly enough. He had a side gig, which initially raised a little bit of questions and curiosity from some reporters. Typically, something like this happens, you've got a tattletale. You've got somebody, an enemy, who points that out to the press and has them chase it down. He had a side gig. You're supposed to report on that. You're not supposed to get side income unless you actually report and get authorization for it. And apparently this individual, Mr. Fuji, didn't report that. And the reporters, kind of sniffed that out and chased him down without him knowing about it, under surveillance. And they found out that he had not just a side gig, but he had a little bit of something on the side, a female who he was seeing. And this raised other curiosity. Who's this girl that he's seen on the Saturday when he goes to this something on the side, this class? Maya, can you kill your microphone? Because I can hear the background.
Yes, I just did. Thank you.
Okay. But I can also hear stuff in your background too.
Well, I'm sorry, my cat is really keen to come into the room and be the star of the show. Yes.
Japanese politics should appeal to everybody. You're right.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. So anyway, we're talking about this fellow in the bureaucrat who is been identified for some sort of scandalous action. So the fact that he was kind of sleeping on the side with a female, they did a little bit more investigation. This all broke last week, by the way. And it turns out that she is a reporter for Asahi newspapers. She's a political reporter. Thankfully, she's unmarried. He's married. And this infidelity begins to cloud, the legislation and that sort of thing. So it's not so much the LDP. The LDP is, especially the LDP who is favorable to Mr. Kishida, is kind of like saying, "Oh God, why could this happen like this?" But for the opposition, it's great news. They get to criticize the Prime Minister on ethical and legislative ends, and prevent him from being as successful as he's attempting to be. So it's a interesting dynamic. But in any event, with this bureaucrat probably out of the picture by now, hopefully he still has a job, but it was a huge scandal coming at a very bad time. The Prime Minister still is pushing for the economic security legislation. And there are four main pillars here. Let me go through what the four pillars are. They want to beef up the infrastructure security. So there are certain things like electric wires, electric infrastructure, the pipelines, the gas, the oil from the port into the city. These kinds of strategic infrastructure they want to bolster. The second thing is they want to stabilize the supply chain, which was one of the things that came under great concern during COVID and during the situation with China kind of escalating trade tensions. They want to facilitate the public-private cutting-edge technology. So in the supplemental budget, they did earmark for higher technology, for bringing some of the manufacturers who have decided to go overseas to manufacture because labor was cheaper. There was a closer proximity to major inputs to production. They've decided to kind of bring that home, and more emphasis is on tying up the public-private partnership for cutting edge. And it sounds a little bit like what we had in the 80s with the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, supplementing industry and kind of eliminating or reducing foreign competition in Japan's shores to develop higher end, better technology for export markets. But it seems like this is not specifically for export, but just for security, for the security of the Japanese nation, and to hold their position as the third largest economic force or country in the world. And The fourth pillar of the economic security is to keep patents and sensitive technology undisclosed. This is not quite a slap at China, not overtly, but there are a lot of PhD students, a lot of graduate students that come from China that are studying in Japanese universities. Japanese universities are not quite at the forefront as they are in the United States in developing technology and in servicing some of the bigger companies, but they are making great inroads there, and having graduate students participate at that level, it does create some sort of a leakage. Apparently they've had some disclosures on that. So it's a tough deal to have foreign students coming into Japan to pursue, higher education, and to restrict them in team participation in certain areas of sensitivity. So that's kind of the way this is going. The economic security, one of the reasons why this scandal with Mr. Fuji and this Asahi newspaper reporter came to light was because Asahi apparently was scooping the other news channels on what's going on with economic security. And it was very curious how they were able to scoop the other people who are working diligently too. So apparently they had an inside line there, and indeed they did. So this reporter was figuring out through her relationship with Mr. Fuji what the penalties were for violation of the economic security code. So when the legislation is passed, it requires specifically 14 industries to kind of button up, to adopt certain requirements, to make sure that their inputs into technology are from verified countries who are friendly to Japan, not to import, the cheaper ones that could have Trojan horses or some sort of a backdoor technology. That's happened in the past. So they're really tightening up there. So 14 industries, which are deemed to be significantly strategic. And there will be punishments for not adhering to what the government says on, sourcing inputs to production, to sourcing how you run your technology, the kind of encryption that you might use, the various devices on running your companies. If you don't facilitate and follow the directions of the Japanese government that are issued under this law, there are punishments for that. So it could be, 1 million yen for violations for every day, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of curiosity there that is going to be revealed as the legislation is implemented. They want to reinforce the supply chain, and in many instances that means either restricting where that supply chain is coming from or bringing it here into Japan. And with the decline of population, the older people being a higher portion of the Japanese population, the number of people paying into the Social Security system, Japan has got a lot of issues to deal with, especially when they're trying to encourage companies to bring their production into Japan. We've talked about before the influx and the need for foreign workers to come into Japan to supplement the workforce here. It is just another one of those headaches, and there's also some news that's come out of that with regard to COVID and the entry restrictions that I will get to. And finally, the sharing of potential patent and security and sensitive information. There will be penalties that are assigned to that. So there are a lot of companies that have joint venture opportunities. And also, you might know that when a company is trying to import a product into Japan in order to receive verification and authorization to trade, they need to supplement their application to the ministry, to the various ministries, or perhaps to the ministry to which they fall under, if it's medical or if it's an automobile part of that sort of thing. You're supposed to submit the designs and how the operation works and the various inputs. Some colors for additives, for example, are restricted under Japanese regulations that aren't restricted in other places. So you have to reveal the entire the manufacturing process and things like that. So in this process, you are revealing some of your sensitive strategic information to the Japanese government. So similarly, when the Japanese are trading elsewhere and they're trying to put their products into the stream of commerce, they similarly must do this. And so that means that under this economic security legislation, probably some restriction to trade is going to be a part of that. So some companies like it, some companies don't. Probably on balance, the large companies don't like it because it restricts their trading opportunities. But for economic security, for ensuring that, the Japanese government is putting these laws and these penalties together. Moving on, I'd like to talk about COVID. The booster shots are going out in the workforce in a really strong, aggressive manner. Many companies are accepting the booster shots. They've got allotments that are allocated by the Ministry of Health and Welfare. They are inoculating their employees. Japan Airlines, ANA, Rakuten, all of the big companies are now on board with this through Japanese government encouragement. The Prime Minister has announced he wants 1 million inoculations per day. He's probably at, or we are probably at, around 600,000. So it is within reach. It just needs to be boosted. The Prime Minister's popularity has taken a dip because he hasn't been more aggressive. The problem with being a little bit more aggressive on that also impacts the entry restrictions on foreigners coming into Japan. So there's at a political level, the Japanese population is more fearful of a resurgence of COVID or Omicron or some sort of variant there, and there's this impression that this comes in, mostly the back door through foreigners or for the cruise ships. You might remember that, when this whole thing first started, it was from the cruise ship that ported in Yokohama or in Osaka. So there's real sensitivity there. At the other end of that, though, you've got so many foreign students and researchers who have put their life on hold for at least 2 years to get into the program that they've already been accepted in. So he's getting it both ways. We've talked earlier about protests in various capitals in Southeast Asia and also in Germany, in the Netherlands, in front of the Japanese embassy, complaining about the restrictions of going back into Japan. So it's not just researchers or students, but that's a big part of it. But it's also companies who have people that are waiting, sometimes in the home country, but sometimes they're just international executives with their families and their dog that have already finished their 3-year stint in some location, and it's time for them to rotate in Japan. Everything has been put on hold, and they can't make that growth in their business policies. So it's really created a lot of problems. It's not just the students and the researchers, it is business travelers as well. The Prime Minister announced on Friday, if you've watched the news, that he's going to increase the number of people who come in daily from 3,500 to 5,000. It's not enough, but he's getting hit there too. If he goes beyond 5,000, the infrastructure at the airports and in the various entry levels in the ports, for example, the infrastructure there is really strained at 5,000. So 5,000 per day was about the number before COVID hit. So it's kind of in that area, but you've got a backlog of 15,000 students and researchers. And in the in the pronouncement of the Prime Minister, he's going to increase from 3,500 to 5,000 people. The people who are farther out waiting, they don't apparently get a preference to come in first. So even at 5,000 a day, you've got a huge backlog there. April 1st is the beginning of the fiscal year. That's when students start their classes. That's when people begin their jobs, that sort of thing. So there's a tremendous push here. It looks like, also in conjunction with this, that several prefectures will come off the pre-emergency notification. So they will immediately come off of, as of today, pre-emergency, 5 prefectures, and 17 prefectures who are in emergency will stay there until, I think, March 7th or so. Yes, it looks like March 7th. So what we're seeing is that the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health and the Foreign Ministry, who is in charge of visa applications and entry requirements, they will allow people to come in. The inoculation or the quarantine period will go from 7 days, as it is currently now, to 3 days for most travelers, unless you can satisfy 3 requirements. And that means that you have proof of your 3rd inoculation, you have proof of a negative test, and you come from a country that hasn't suffered or is not suffering now from any dramatic COVID infections. So with those requirements satisfied, there is no quarantine restriction. That's going to start in March. So it's not just here in Japan, in many countries of the world, that those decisions have already been made. Japan is a bit of a laggard there. So I think you can see in March and April, it'll happen pretty quickly. I think there will be pronouncements out of the Japanese Diet and from the Prime Minister's office that gradually we will be opening the borders here. Tourists are kind of several months out from here, but business travelers, students, researchers, that sort of thing will be opened up, and I think you'll see a lot of movement here over the next couple of weeks. In Korea, they are electing. Thank you, Maya. In Korea, they are electing their new president. There's a tough fight going on there. Geopolitically, Korea is kind of in the crosshairs. North Korea has fired more rockets in January than it has at any time in the last 2 years. You might remember in his discussions with President Trump, there was a moratorium on firing ballistic missiles. That ended in January. In January, they fired 7 missiles. It's really caused a lot of concern. The foreign minister of South Korea, Japan, the United States made a kind of a whirlwind tour in Southeast Asia, ending in Hawaii this time last week. And they made a couple of pronouncements there. The United States is really hell-bent on making sure that Japan and South Korea have a better relationship moving forward, because it does create a lot of additional unnecessary tension when the United States is dealing with North Korean missile launches. Japan is obviously one of the closest targets and kind of the pronounced enemy of North Korea. But South Korea suffers from that too. And the inability of South Korea and Japan to work more collaboratively, to be a little bit more friendly in terms of trade, investment, and also geopolitical military security is really a sticking point for the United States. They're putting a lot of effort into that. I don't know how much progress has been made. Quad is one of the other areas. Apparently, the President of the United States will be here in May to have a Quad super conference hosted in Japan. So this will be the first trip of President Joe Biden to Japan. It's a pretty big deal. He may or may not travel to other areas in the region. It's hard to say right now, but I think with the new ambassador to the United States here in Japan, you're going to see a lot more activity going on between the United States and Japan. It's not that it was at standstill because Rahm Emanuel had not been assigned or hadn't landed in Japan yet, but the fact that we do have an ambassador, and he's really geared to addressing issues. He's very active right now. He's fully ensconced, and I think you're going to see a lot coming out of the U.S. Embassy and out of his administration. So with that, Maya, I'd like to close up this briefing. I've gone on for almost 30 minutes, and open the floor up and maybe say goodbye to the people on LinkedIn and just port over to Clubhouse as you direct. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I apologize for keeping my mic open. So I realized that there is something which I shouldn't have done, and I'll be more careful next time. Promise. Yes. So thank you for this. Yes, we are moving to Clubhouse only to accept questions and comments, also different opinions as well. So thank you very much for this, Timothy. When we finish the broadcast here, please log into Clubhouse once again, because now you're sounding via my mic there. So it looks like we're in the same room, although we're, I don't know, maybe 50 kilometers away from each other, but that's okay. So it's going. Thank you very much. I'm ending the broadcast, the live broadcast on LinkedIn, and let's move to Clubhouse only. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Okay? Yes.
Great. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you. See you there.
LinkedIn audience.